Welcome everyone to a webinar on design systems and how you can build with AI and vibe coding tools. We're going to talk about a few topics that are kind of a preview of the full workshop that we're giving on Saturday, September 27th at AI House. I want to first introduce you to Ray Velez. He's the expert who's going to be leading the webinar. He is currently the head of product at BeGlobal. He also has his own web design company. And I've been working with Ray for the last few months. He came to one of the workshops in Seattle Tech Week. And I'm really excited to start to offer more advanced workshops through We Build with AI. And design systems, I think, is one of the ways that you can make a really quick impact on improving the content that you create with vibe coding tools. Just introduce myself as well for anyone who hasn't been to one of my workshops before. I created We Build with AI in order to support the community and help anyone code with AI. I think there's been a lot of progress in, especially the last year, on tools, agentic coding tools such as Bolt, Lovable, Cursor, Claude Code, and now it's easier than ever for anyone to start coding and building with AI. We'll kind of go through it in a little bit, but I've led over 20 workshops for over 1,000 people that have come to them, many people multiple times. And there have been people from Amazon, Meta, so all the big tech companies, as well as local companies like Zillow or startups like Blue Sky. Also taught workshops and trainings for corporations as well, and executive education course at Harvard University this summer. My background, I'm not a coder. I've learned a lot of different languages, JavaScript, HTML, Python, to do some of the things that I needed to at startups I've been at. So I've been at early stage startups. I was at Uber. I did project with Dropbox, and then most recently I was with Amazon and AWS before doing my own thing. So today we'll go through we'll explain what are design systems. We'll go through some popular examples and do a live demo of actually how we can use design systems to transform a vibe-coded website in real time. Time for Q&A at the end as well. In the full workshop that we're offering on Saturday the 27th at AI House, it'll be in person, so you'll get hands-on help, and we'll go through exercises together. You also get a free month of Bolt Pro and working on specific component libraries, as well as we'll give you some specific natural language prompts that you can use in your own projects as well. And in the end, we'll give you tips and the tools that you need to maintain polished, human-centered design. There are a few other workshops that I have coming up as well. So in the last 5 months, yeah, no worries. As I said, over 1,000 people, unique people, have come to my workshops. Over 20 events. I think this or next week might be the 25th event. 90% are new vibe coders, 80% are non-engineers, 50% are women, and 50% are current or future founders. So you can check it out on my Luma calendar to see all the upcoming events, and you can see what's available. In addition to the workshop on the 27th, there's also the next City Seattle hackathon on the 9th, as well as a vibe coding event sponsored by the Harvard Business School Alumni Association of Seattle. And then we'll be hosting a few workshops on the east side in Bellevue, coding for AI with current and future founders, as well as a vibe coding event for AI Week, and then hosting a Cursor meetup and coding workshop in the middle of October as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to really talk about the content that you all came here for.
Awesome. So, to give you a quick background on how I ended up using these AI tools, I've been consulting and freelancing, and I did, I taught myself basics on HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then after that, I was mostly focused on no-code tools like, Webflow, Framer, Shopify. And, something I enjoyed about those tools was the flexibility with design. I pretty much discovered Lovable last year. That was my introduction to AI coding outside of using ChatGPT to, come up with scripts and CSS that I could use in those no-code tools. But for me, Lovable just opened up the floodgates in terms of like possibilities and being able to deploy like full stack projects. But I quickly realized that, there was a limitation with how projects what they would look like, right? And it's something that all these agents and AI tools come with. They come with a default library or design system. And what we've been uncovering is when you implement design systems, and there are different ways that you could do this, you get not only full flexibility on what the output will look like, but also you're able to collaborate more easily with colleagues and other people in your team, because you use a common thread of what I would call visual DNA. So you're able to break out of that default library, which is based on ChadCN. And first, we'll define what exactly is a design system. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this terminology, but for those of you that are not, a design system is made up of components, tokens, and themes. And essentially, components are reusable UI elements, anything like a button, a call to action, a card, a navigation bar that engages with the user and will give you that behavior across the product. Then we have design tokens, and that's the foundation of components, right? That's going to define what are the color themes, what's the typography, what are spacing, margin, and padding looking like. And essentially, it defines the visual language in your project and your components. And then the third pillar are themes. And themes are like these rules that your design system will follow. So for example, if your theme defines a certain type of color palette and contrast, then your components and design tokens will align with your theme, which essentially accelerates your design process because everything is well defined from the get-go, and you don't have to overthink, and you don't have to fight with the AI trying to get things to sit correctly on mobile or padding and spacing. So overall, I like to use the word DNA when it comes to design system because it's the set of rules that your design system will follow. In terms of, another way to see this is, if you had a toolbox, tokens would be the primitive values that design systems will use as variables. Components are built based on tokens. And for example, when you see color primary, spacing, SM, which is spacing small, radius, these are all mostly like Tailwind and CSS terminology that your AI agent will implement inline in your files. And then again, a theme, it's important to define in your design system because it'll tell the AI if you're using light theme versus dark theme, what are the color contrasts, what's the color of the text, and just making your life a lot easier when you're working on, especially as bigger projects are onboarded. And why is it that AI in general benefits from design systems? Well, going back to ChadCN, this is the vanilla React library and UI kit that Lovable, Bolt, VO, all of them are shipped with. So that's why if you take a project made with the default design system from Lovable and compare it to Bolt and compare it to VO, it's hard to tell what tool was used because they're all using, again, the exact same design library. And the downside of this is that your app ends up looking like every other AI-generated project. And it's harder for you to stand out when it comes to users, investors, customers. I think because AI is still so new in terms of like the code generation capabilities, people haven't really focused too much on the design limits, and everyone is still very impressed with the technical side of things. Like, hey, I can integrate a database easily. I can add all this functionality. But I'm assuming that as, in the next few months or the next year, people are going to start craving like a different look and feel so that things feel more unique and more original to you. And again, there's, at least when I started using Lovable and all these other agents, I would spend an enormous amount of time and credits trying to break outside of that design structure. And that's kind of when I realized, like, okay, it's because they're all based on the same library. And I started looking at ways to break outside of those restrictions. And, benefits of a design system, it's going to align with your brand guidelines. So it's easier to collaborate with other projects within your team, and making sure that if you're working on different projects that cover different functionality, at least in terms of brand guidelines and theme and look and feel, it's all going to be aligned, perfectly across the board. And the biggest thing is you don't waste time and tokens trying to break outside of those design restrictions, and you can focus more on functionality and not so much on styling. There are three main ways, at least three ways that we've discovered how to implement design libraries. Number one is using natural language, which is what most people prompt with. So for example, if I'm going to create a landing page, and I'll give you more concrete examples after this presentation, this slide. But for example, you can tell Lovable or Bolt or VO, you can say something like, hey, create a neo-brutalist layout with bold typography. That's very different than you simply telling the AI to create a landing page with this and this. But if you define from the very first prompt the exact design library or design system that you wish to use, you'll be surprised with how well it can implement this. The second tier of prompting with AI, which is one of my favorites, is going to, for example, CodePen, which is an open source library, GitHub, or other design libraries, and copying the CSS from those projects, and then telling your AI that you want to create a design system based on that CSS. And then you literally copy and paste that code, and then the AI agent will take it from there. The third level, which to me is the most elevated way of prompting, is using NPM installs. This is a little bit more technical, and we'll also cover that a little bit. We'll go a lot more into detail on our live workshop on how to use NPMs. But essentially, when you look at companies like, any major company like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they all have very defined design systems that you pretty much have to use as a foundation to any project. And what's cool is, I would say like 90% of these design systems are made open source, where you can go to their NPM library and install their design system into your project. For example, Shopify has Polaris, Google has Material UI, and there's one of the things I'll be sharing today is a library of design systems that you can go to. It's all free, open source, and start experimenting on how NPM packages can be used in your project. Now, what are the four pillars in my perspective of what gives a design system value? Is number one, consistency across the board. Number two is speed. Number three is scalability. And for me, scalability is a major part of this. As you're working on projects that become more and more complex, having to go back and forth with design and backend can become very frustrating and time consuming. So having a well-defined design system that you're happy with and that you can replicate over and over from the very first prompt from the get-go will just make the whole process a lot more enjoyable. Because it incentivizes collaboration, where I can collaborate with 3 other developers and designers, and we're all completely aligned on what the output in terms of front end will look like. Some of the consistency that you will see is just visual harmony in terms of color, typography, spacing, behavioral consistency, which is a big one. Like, how is this going to behave in mobile? How is it going to behave in tablet? How are hover animations going to behave if we're using cards? And let's say that card has a hover action where the card flips. How exactly is that going to look like? Those are all things that you can define from the very first prompt. And, truth be told, some design systems are more elaborate than others. I've experimented with some basic design systems. One of the first examples I'll be sharing is the neo-brutalism design system. It's used by Gumroad, and it's more of a visual thing that I'll be showing, but it shows you like a very sharp contrast between the default ShadCN layout and the more complex design system that, for example, Gumroad has. One thing that is interesting is the concept of design system stems from atomic design, where atomic design is seen as, tokens being atoms, components are molecules, and then themes are the full template or organism. And that's kind of how I like to see things is you start with tokens and then you zoom out a little bit and get a full component. And then if you zoom out even more, that's where you get the full theme of your project. In terms of scale and syncing with your team, I think design systems will benefit anyone who's a designer, a developer, or overall someone new to the AI space and an AI builder who just wants to, tackle both design and development. This will definitely, save you a lot of time and will just make the process a lot more enjoyable. And now I will share with you guys some concrete examples of how, in this case, using Lovable, I've implemented design systems with natural language, using CSS, and using NPM packages. So let me pull up here the very first example. Okay, so can you guys see my screen right now? Can you guys see this dashboard that I pulled up?
Yes.
Perfect. So this project, when it first started, the first prompt I gave Lovable was a very, very simple prompt, and I kept it ambiguous on purpose. I simply told Lovable, create a CRM dashboard. Now, again, all these examples that I'm sharing with you are applicable to Bolt, VO. You can even use it with Claude Code, Copilot, whatever AI agent. This will be applicable to your tools. So the first prompt I gave it was simple, create a CRM dashboard. And as you can tell, it created the full project, at least the root page. But design-wise, it's still extremely basic. And if I didn't know how to use design systems, I would spend an enormous amount of time and tokens trying to get this to look a little bit more visually, just original and different. So the next prompt I gave it was this second prompt. So far, this project has only 2 prompts. The second prompt I gave it was use the CSS below as a design system for the project and make sure that this code is used as a reference for components, tokens, and themes. Now, this CSS that you see here, I took it from this project that I'm sharing with you now. This is from CodePen, and CodePen is an open source MIT licensed component library where you can go in and pretty much extract code as you need it and use it in your projects, right? So in this case, I saw this dashboard and I loved the fact that it has glass morphism. It has, in terms of design, it looks very modern, at least in my eyes, and way different than anything that Lovable can ship out of the box, right? So what I did was I went over here to the CSS section and I copied the entire CSS. And again, if you guys want to explore CodePen on your own, just go to codepen.io and you can spend, I spent so many hours and weekends just going through projects, exploring CSS. I've even combined different projects where I take CSS from one, combine it with CSS from another project, and then come out with like very original things. But going back to the first example here, so again, I took the CSS from that project and it's quite extensive, and fortunately Lovable, and I believe most AI builders have a character limit of up to 50,000 characters that you can copy and paste in one prompt. I have had some examples where it's so much CSS that I divided into 2 prompts, but it still worked very well. So once I implemented this CSS, the result it gave me is this one. So, for example, hypothetically, if I wanted to do this based on only prompts and not using CSS, I think it probably would have taken me easily, 5 to 6 hours just back and forth trying to implement glass morphism, backgrounds, spacing. So as you can see, you get pretty stunning results early on with just getting the right CSS. Another example I'll share with you is this one here. I'm going to share a new tab. So in this case here, we have not a dashboard, but a simple landing page. And I gave Lovable a very like generic, ambiguous prompt, and that was create a landing page for a SaaS company. So based on that prompt, it generated this Shad CN based layout. And, you know, I think most people would see this and say like, oh, you know, this is super cool. You know, came out in one shot. It's looking, in my eyes, it looks fine. But we all know that if you compare this to other AI generated landing pages out there, it's going to look exactly the same. So what I did in this example is I used natural language. In this case, I told Lovable to create a design system based on neo-brutalism. And this is, again, a style based on Gumroad. So after I implemented this, it took my results. And mind you, I did add a few more prompts on here, and I'll show you what that thread looks like. So the very first prompt gave me this example. Sorry, this one here. So it already implemented a design system that looks very different from the very first one, but it still doesn't look quite there. Doesn't have the right backgrounds. It's not ADA compliant at all. It's not you know, a white text with a beige background is a big no. So what I did was I added an extra ADA compliant, make sure that there's proper contrast between backgrounds. And then after 2 more prompts, this is the final output. So even if you look at, you know, the time spent here, actually I started at 10 and then at 10:54, I did take some breaks in between. But in theory, this would have been about a 5-minute process going from this, which again looks very generic, to something like this that looks way more original. It has, at least in my eyes, it has like kind of like a cartoony look that would work with some startups. You know, someone mentioned blockchain earlier, and then I even have some examples that I'll try to share of design systems that would work well for blockchain products. But in terms of design, this immediately looks like something that you could create with Framer or Webflow, but definitely not something that Lovable or any AI agent would ship by default. One project here that I want to share with you guys is, this is also going back to using CSS. So a few months ago, I created a component library that gives you, this is based on CodePen projects. So with CodePen, you have to copy the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript separately if you want the full component or just the CSS. And what I did was I packaged a few of my favorite CodePen projects, and it's essentially a prompt. So this is a great tool if you guys want to explore with something that gives you immediate results. You can go to InstaLanding.ai. I'll send out the link after the meeting. And for example, just to show you how this works, if I go here and copy a prompt, and then I'm going to go directly to Lovable and just paste that right here and hit enter. And while this is running, just so I know we're running a little bit short on time, but while this is running, I do want to share another phenomenal library, and this is for specifically for design systems. And it's called component.gallery. This is a library that gives you different design systems for, you know, Visa, you have Microsoft, Google. It's a very robust gallery. And this is the third type of prompting that we mentioned. This is where you take an NPM package and you install it in your project so that moving forward, everything in your project will follow those guidelines. And the way it works is, for example, if you go to let's say this one from, oh, so one thing to keep in mind, however, is when you're using any of these NPM packages, make sure that it's React and Tailwind CSS friendly. Some of these are using Angular, some of these are using other programming languages that are not Lovable friendly or Bolt or VO friendly, but most of them are React, so they should work just fine. So for example, this one here on the top from Visa, for example, if you click on that link on there, you will find on their website, there are ways to browse all their components, and each component library is structured a little bit different, but at the end of the day, you will find the NPM package that you have to run in order for this project to come to life. So going back to the initial Lovable project that I was sharing. So this one here, that was a prompt that I shared from InstaLanding. And again, this is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all pretty much summarized into one TSX file that is Lovable friendly. And what I find cool is, for example, right now we only have a hero section here, but if I go on Lovable and tell it create the rest of this landing page using the existing component as a design library reference. Use the CSS in this component for all components, tokens, and themes. Because we want to remember that components, tokens, and themes is the, at least from a natural language standpoint, that is what the AI agent will understand as a reference on what to do with the design library. And then something else that I'm going to add to this prompt is do not use any shad CN components for the landing page. So now what's going to happen is we already gave Lovable this reference, and it's going to create the rest of the landing page using this design as inspiration. So in theory, it should take colors from here. It should take, border radius, font. We're using a badge with this highlighted little figure here. So in theory, everything else that's created after this should follow this guideline. This is more of an experimental example because we also have a 3D rendered background, which is made with CSS and JavaScript. So most of the time, what I found is that Lovable is able to extract some of these, some of the code being used for this background and implement it on the design itself. So we're just going to give it another few seconds here. So we see that's creating already a testimonial. It's already created an about section. It's created a feature section. It has a call to action. So let's see if Lovable will behave and follow my instructions. And it's very important to overemphasize, like you will see here that I mentioned the word design library, or I mentioned components a few times because you really, really have to tell the AI agent to not use ChatCN components. So here, hopefully in the next few seconds, we'll see what comes out of this. And as a side note, I've always been surprised that these AI builders aren't like serving us ads or anything while people are waiting. I've always thought that was a monetization opportunity for them, but at the same time, I'm happy they're not bombarding us with AWS ads or anything like that. Okay, so now we have, in theory, a full landing page that follows that new DNA that we gave this this AI agent. So as you can tell, it did follow, I think it did a decent job. I can tell, like, for example, some of the borders here are using some of the animations we had on the background. It's definitely using the same font. It has the same hover animations. And again, this is just based on the very first prompt I gave it, or second prompt. So I think, based on the fact that we only use 2 prompts, this gives you still a ton of wiggle room and flexibility for you to jump in and start making this even more original. But it already has quite a lot going on. I can't imagine how long it would take me to create this from scratch with Lovable. I probably would have given up already trying to get animations to work correctly, especially some of these hover animations here. But yeah, let me shift gears here. And so far, based on what we've covered, does anyone have any questions? I know that we're limited with time, but we'll go into a lot more detail during our in-person workshop on the 27th. But we're happy to answer questions or any observations that anyone has so far.
Hi. Do you have any suggestions to create the design system itself, or is that still a manual process of putting together the design system in the first place and then using that as your prompt?
That is a really good question. So let me show you here on my screen real quick. So there are 2 ways of essentially creating your design system. One is the way we've seen, where you tell the AI agent, hey, you're going to use these components and use it as inspiration. But truth be told, the best way to do this is, I'm going to open VS Code here real quick. I'm going to open a new folder. So one thing which I didn't have time today to show everyone, but it will be covered in the live workshop, is how can I deploy my own design system through NPM? And I'm coming up with a template that I'm going to share with everyone so they can apply it in their own teams. It's pretty much a folder structure where you are going to tell, under source, yeah, so here it is. So what I did with one of that neo-brutalism example, I created an NPM package that, instead of you using natural language to describe this by referencing Gumroad, you can simply upload it into NPM and deploy this in your project. And what you need is a series of components, a theme, and tokens. And this would be the ideal way of deploying a design system that is original and unique to your organization, because then you're not relying on CSS, copy pasting, or natural language. You simply deploy your project into NPM. And for those that are not familiar with NPM, NPM is a library from GitHub, npmjs.com. And you can create a free account and upload your own packages that you can then deploy into projects. So right now I've been experimenting with quite a few here. And once I find what the restriction I've found so far is, for example, with Lovable, when you look at a Lovable project, and this is also applicable to VO and Bolt, it comes out with a predefined set of UI files. And this UI folder is what makes things look like Shatsen, right? So the ideal design library will essentially replace every single file that you see here with your designs. So for example, you would come up with a TSX file for accordions, for alerts, for badges, for your avatars. And there's about 20 something files here. So the more files you add to your component library, the better. In this case, for example, with NPM, it's also interesting because if you go on their website and just look up design system, It'll pull up different examples that are also open source, like Salesforce here uploaded or updated 14 days ago their design system, and that's something that you can go in here and essentially just run it in your project by simply running this npm reference that you see up here. So if I go here in Lovable and tell it create a design system based on this npm package, and then I run it. Now, I'm not even sure what languages, programming language Salesforce is using, so I may come up with some errors, but hopefully this answered your question somewhat.
Yes, it's quite helpful. Do you have Figma in your workflow?
I do, yes. I actually, that's something else that we didn't have enough time to cover, is I've used Figma on dev mode in order to extract the Tailwind CSS and essentially apply it just like I would with, for example, this is a Framer just updated their website, but 2 days ago, their website looked similar to this. So I was running an experiment where I would grab from this project the Tailwind CSS and apply it to a project. Actually, what I did, just to show you real quick, this is a project I'm working on, which is all vibe coded, by the way. And it is a visual builder, right? An editor. So one of the features that I wanted to have on this visual editor is, for example, a SAS template. So you can come into the SAS template and start modifying anything you want on here. You can remove the navigation. Again, this was all vibe coded, but using initially Lovable, but then I use Claude Code. But everything that you see here design-wise was extracted from this Figma file that you see here.
Adam, I think you're muted.
Sorry. In the workshop, we'll also go through how to use Figma to create some of these design systems and take what you already created and apply it to a vibe coding platform. Any other questions? I know we're about 5 minutes over, but happy to take 1 or 2 more. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Ray. I know I always learn a lot every time I talk to you and I see some of the stuff that you're working on. So thanks a lot. And again, if this was interesting to you and you want to get started on it, we'll send out a recording of this as well as some of the web links, and definitely sign up for the workshop on the 27th at AI House from 10 to 1 p.m. And we'll go into a lot more depth and give you hands-on kind of experience for actually creating your own websites using Bolt and Lovable and V0 to implement some of these design system concepts.